Morton has been curator and head of French paintings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. since 2010, having previously held curatorial positions at the Getty and the MFA Houston. At the NGA, she has organized several seminal exhibitions on various 19th century subjects and artists, including Cezanne. In 2018, she was awarded the Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters by France's Ministry of Culture, and today we'll be speaking about how one particular collector, Charles Lœser, sparked wider interest in and appreciation for Cezanne in the United States through his own collecting and generous legacy of bequests.
A little closer. There we go. I think it just turned on. Thank you. Thank you so much for welcoming me to the table. And I wanted to thank Denis Coutagne for inviting me to participate in this colloque. I joined the National Gallery several years after the epic Cezanne in Provence project, which Denis did brilliantly with the beloved curator Philip Conisby. And actually, several people that worked on that show or around that show are here: Faya Kazi, Anne Herningsvald, Kimberly Jones, and Michelle Bird, who wanted to be here but was also working on that project. So shout out to Michelle. I am honored to represent the National Gallery with its deep history of engagement then with Cezanne. And of course, we have the wonderful Chester Dale collection and the Paul and Bunny Mellon collection, and other excellent collectors that have created one of the great Cezanne collections in the United States. Today, I would like to talk about a couple of pictures that you might not know as well that made their way to the National Gallery, and to sort of highlight some of the various currents that Cezanne's pictures have taken outside of France, and what his pictures have meant to different people in different contexts along the way. So the study starts with a very sort of rapid move to Florence. And I'm mostly going to talk about Charles Lœser, but I was asked by Denis to mention Egisto Fabbri as well. These are two wealthy young Americans who decamped for Florence in the 1890s, late 1880s, 1890s. They were part of an international cultural set that included Anglo-Americans like Mary Cassatt, Sargent, Whistler, Gertrude and Leo Stein, Bernard Berenson, of course, Edith Wharton, Vernon Lee. They came from New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and London to Florence. Lœser and Fabbri were among the earliest of serious collectors of Cezanne. As you know, Cezanne was something of an artist's artist until Volard's epic show in 1895. And they started buying Cezanne just 1 year after that exhibition. Fabbri was the son of an Italian immigrant to the United States. He owned some 30 Cezannes. He sold them over the decades of the early 20th century to support his Florentine villa lifestyle. And he included in his collection two of the greatest Cezanne portraits in the United States. One of the great Cezannes of all time, Madame Cezanne in a blue armchair, of Rilke's descriptive fame. Fabbri bought this picture from Vollard in 1907. He sold it to Paul Rosenberg and Daniel Wildenstein in Paris in 1928. They then sold it to Robert Treat Paine of Boston, and it made its way in 1944 to the MFA Boston. My favorite picture, I'm sorry these slides are so, they seem so, there, you can see them? Oh, maybe it's just my angle. Thank you, thank you. This is my favorite painting at the National Gallery of Art, so I wanted it to look as good as it possibly could. Fabbri buys this picture in 1896, and then he sold it back to Vollard in 1904, immediately regretted doing this, ran back to Vollard's shop to see if he could buy it back, but the price had gone up, Vollard. So he swallowed his pride and got out his pocketbook and bought it back. And he kept it until 1925, when, or somewhere around 1925, he sold it to Paul Rosenberg, who then sold it to Jacob Goldschmidt in 1929. When the famous Goldschmidt sale occurred in London in 1958, Paul Mellon knew what was going to be on the docket. He knew he wanted this picture. He chartered a plane and flew to London, and by raising a paddle, basically changed the way that the art market works by spending so much money on a single work of art at auction. That was in 1958. He had it in his brick house out in Upperville, Virginia, and claimed that it was actually his favorite picture in his collection. It came to the National Gallery in the 1990s. And then just some other ex-Fabbri pictures that made their way to the National Gallery of Art. This wonderful portrait of Paul Guillaume, the literally textbook painting, Houses in Provence, which Roger Fry used to describe in words successfully, possibly for the first time ever, what Cezanne was up to in a painting like this. This marvelous landscape near Paris. And finally, at the water's edge. But I do want to focus a little bit more on Charles Lœser, who I think is the more mysterious of these two figures. And it's more of a National Gallery story. And as I said, it involves a group of pictures that I really don't think are very well known. So who was Charles Lœser? He was the son of a Jewish immigrant, a Jewish-German immigrant to the United States, who was in sort of the fabric business, textile business. He started a small business in Brooklyn and built it into the second largest department store in that borough. Charles then gets to go to Harvard, and he studies philosophy there. He was classmates with Bernard Berenson and the philosopher George Santayana. Bernard Berenson, who literally was in the same class, born, I think, 1 year earlier, also was of Central European Jewish descent. He had emigrated to Boston in 1875 and enrolled in Harvard in 1885. Lœser, who was part of a group at Harvard at the time, they were really sort of cultural fanatics, poetry, music, painting, of course, international sort of literature, and they adored Europe. Lœser moves to Europe in the late 1880s. He arrives in Florence circa 1890, kind of following Bernard Berenson. And of course, Santayana was also going to Florence, so this clique moves to Florence. There are stories, wonderful stories of Lœser riding around the Italian countryside outside, the Tuscan countryside outside of Florence, in Colloque, visiting small churches and sort of playing this connoisseurial attributional game, trying to figure out who is painting what, sort of honing a connoisseurial approach, applying a kind of combination of Morellian sort of systematic interpretation of paintings with a more psychological, perceptual approach, which interested Berenson more. And they hatched, Berenson leading the way, a different kind of engagement with objects that demanded close looking and an openness to new kinds of aesthetic effect. Berensonian connoisseurship was super seductive at the time, and Lœser was all in, and he actually starts to collect French paintings. The two were very close until they weren't. And Berenson has a sort of long history of burning bridges with friends. Lœser met and married in Florence a Jewish-German concert pianist, Olga Kaufmann-Liebert, and they would have one daughter, one child, Matilda. He traveled regularly to Paris, and he goes to Vollard's regularly. He bought his first Cezanne in June of 1896, a few months after Fabbri bought Boy in a Red Waistcoat. And then he circles back in 1897, 98, and 99, and he would buy some 15 Cezanne paintings, possibly more. The documentation is not perfect. Despite the excitement among artists around Cezanne, particularly after the Vollard show, there really still was not, at this moment, a big market for Cezanne. And I really enjoyed learning about some of the other internationals that are in Paris in the 1890s, picking up Cezannes, but it's not a robust market really until the Salon d'Automne exhibition, and then prices go through the roof after that. Lœser would show his Cezannes at this villa that he buys called the Villa Gattaia in the hills approaching San Miniato, just up near the Piazzale Michelangelo. It was of 14th century origin. He bought it in 1910 and hired a fancy architect to enlarge it for him. He installed his renowned collection of Italian paintings, sculpture, decorative arts, maiolica, 14th to the 17th centuries. He had ancient Greek, Roman, and Asian artifacts, and he had a very large collection of old master prints and drawings. And he hung it in an elegant and sort of but sober way. Everything was together regardless of media, but there was, he sort of avoided the kind of clutter that you found in many installation styles in domestic homes, certainly in the United States at the time. There was a quote unquote unsettling austerity to the way that he displayed his collection. He was a real melomane. Oh, let me show you a picture of one of those rooms. He was a real music fanatic, and he designed a special salone with 2 pianos on the first floor of the villa in which he hung 6 of his Cezannes. At spacious intervals on the warmish light gray wall and plain furniture of an early Victorian sort that is not too assertive, he felt, and allowed one to sit or recline comfortably without distracting the eye. So I think his idea, of course, is that you're listening to music and then sort of meditating on these Cezannes that, again, were placed in a very kind of aesthetic way. 2 of the best pictures he had hung upstairs in his personal quarters. This one, House on the Banks of the Marne from 1888. He kept working on it into the early 1890s. He started it Cezanne in the summer of 1888, and he painted that summer at least 3 pictures on the Marne. And you see this wonderful, rich, cool palette of blues and greens, this tonality flecked with violet touches, white canvas flickering through the whole. It's an absolutely ravishing painting. And then my favorite of the Lœser Cezannes, this Sous-Bois from 1890-92. These 2, hope you can see this picture, were hanging, are hanging here in this photograph of 1961 in the White House in Washington, D.C. And you might recognize there Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, and then the other woman standing is Charles Lœser's daughter, Matilda. So how do these pictures get from the Villa Gattaia upstairs in the personal rooms of Charles Lœser to the White House? This is one of the questions that has been difficult to answer with clarity. However, in the archives of the National Gallery, there is an undated document titled, quote, "My Most Famous Intrigue, the White House Cezannes." It was written by John Walker, who was the chief curator and eventual director of the National Gallery. And it's about 20 pages, typewritten. My sense is that it was a lecture that he wrote out to give to the Metropolitan Club, which is a men's club in Washington, D.C., a sort of elite club. The tone of this text has a kind of clubby freedom and swagger to it, which is my sense of what he might have been up to. And if you know the Metropolitan Club, this could make sense. John Walker was a Harvard man. He had studied with Paul Sachs and won on graduation in 1930 a fellowship at the Villa Itati to study with Bernard Berenson. And he was asked by Paul Sachs and the then Fogg director, the Fogg Art Museum, which is the art museum of Harvard University, to show his gratitude by following up on a bequest that had been made to the Fogg. Now, stay with me here on this story. I think it's really fascinating, and but it takes a few turns, and I'll try and get through it quickly so we can get back to the paintings. So Paul Sachs sent John Walker, in Florence, the copy of Charles Lœser's will. Lœser had died in 1928. It was a handwritten will. It had only been probated in Italy. 2 years before he died, Lœser had negotiated an agreement with the city of Florence to donate more than 30 important objects and decorative arts to the Palazzo Vecchio in exchange for an export license for the rest of his collection, which he would leave to his wife and daughter, knowing that his wife and daughter might not want to live in Italy forever. So there were 162 drawings bequeathed to Harvard, to the Fogg Art Museums in Lœser's will, and there were the 30 objects to the city of Florence. Then the crucial passage for our story, 8 of his best Cezannes, quote unquote, the most valuable, as he put it, to be selected by the President of the United States or his delegate to adorn the White House in Washington. And he specifies that they must be in a room with no other paintings at a hanging height of 1.7 meters from floor to the lower edge of the canvas. Quote, the pictures should be at a distance from one another and so placed in relation to the furniture as to seem like apertures in the wall windows. Apertures in the wall, windows displaying views of the outside. No ropes or other means by which they are fixed or held in their places should be left visible. Shown in this way and with due attention to the color on the walls and elsewhere in this room or rooms, these pictures will be seen to possess a decorative value of the highest order, unquote. Should the president refuse the gift, he closes, they should go to the American embassy in Paris. Walker was asked by his Harvard mentor to get these gifted drawings moving to Harvard. They had been stalled. Italian officials were refusing the export license, but they had accepted the 30 objects, and those were hanging at the Palazzo, installed at the Palazzo Vecchio as the Donazione Lœser, so they were going to have to comply. Bureaucrats were throwing all kinds of problems and delays, hoping Walker would go away, but he persisted, and the drawings ultimately came to the Fogg. John Walker then took a job in Rome as the director of the Fine Arts Department at the American Academy. He was happily living there with his new wife when he was called by Paul Mellon in 1937 to come to DC and be the deputy director, chief curator of this new museum that they were organizing. It had been established that year by Andrew Mellon. He takes that job, moves to DC, forgets about Lœser as he plunges into plans for the new National Museum, which opened in 1941, just before the war. After the war, Walker visited, he was up visiting donors in New York City. He goes to visit Adele Levy, who was the sister of Lessing Rosenwald, who had given this astonishing collection of drawings and prints. It is the backbone of our great works on paper collection at the gallery. She had an excellent collection of Impressionist and post-Impressionist pictures, and in the dining room, he sees a Cezanne that he had last seen at the Villa Gattaia, still life with cherries and peaches. Certainly, this is a great painting. It lives in LACMA, which is actually the city I grew up in. So this is one of the pictures I cut my teeth on. It is a stunning Cezanne. Certainly, it would have been on the list of 8 chosen by the president. So Walker goes to see Olga and Charles Lœser's daughter, Matilda, on his next visit to Florence. The hook, he says, was still there in the wall from which this picture had been deinstalled. In conversation with Matilda, he brings up the will, and he talks about the grave responsibility and the insurance liability of these great Cezannes that belonged to the United States, and the trouble that she might find herself in should anything happen to them. He shamelessly intimidates her. She nervously asks him if he can be the choosing delegate, make the selection of 8, and basically take them away and leave her in peace with her remaining Cezannes. Quote, I still feel ashamed, he wrote, but museum directors on the whole are heartless about benefiting their institutions, unquote. He referred to this event as, quote, my most nefarious activity as director of the National Gallery of Art. He gets back to DC and secures that presidential appointment, and there's still in the files the letter from Harry Truman to John Walker asking him to select the 8, a letter dated June 3rd, 1949. He goes back to Florence, makes his selection. Matilda renounces life interest in the pictures, and they are moved to the French consulate in Florence. More reluctance on the part of the Italian government trying to hang on to these Cezannes. And another nefarious move or two involving, I'm not going to go into all of the things that he does, involving getting the president to renounce the paintings so that they would go to the embassy in Paris, where his best friend David Bruce was the ambassador, Elsa Mellon Bruce's ex-husband. And then he's going to get David Bruce to say, oh, we can't handle them here, so that he can take them at the National Gallery for safekeeping. So all of that is going on. In 1961, so anyways, in any case, eventually the pictures come to the National Gallery where they are hung. In the 1950s, this is before the Dale collection or the Paul Mellon collection comes to the gallery. So it's basically the only Cezannes at the National Gallery, and it's kind of a big deal. In 1961, Walker's ruse is eventually, he gets ratted out. There was a State Department employee that he had alienated, actually really enraged right after the war when he was working on restitution cases. And he gets Dean Rusk to write to Mrs. Kennedy and tell her about this will. And so the press release, so Mrs. Kennedy calls him, they're good old friends, and she says, what's going on here, John? What about this will? He admits guilt. He pleads for mercy, as he put it. And she showed him mercy by allowing him to keep 6 pictures while taking her 2 favorites that I showed you earlier, and basically the 2 best, as Walker agreed. So this is the press. These are the photographs. In fact, I have a better one. This is a photograph that accompanied the press release of 1961. 2 Cezannes in the green room of the White House, Forest and House on the Marne. Mrs. Kennedy was going to rotate them, so through the remaining Lœser pictures, the other 6, to share with the American people. She writes in the press release, quote, Mr. Lœser is one of a number of important collectors to present treasures lovingly collected during a lifetime to the president's house. It is hoped that their pride in the White House will serve as an example to other collectors, so that one day this much-loved house will be as great a repository of historical and beautiful objects as any other official residence in the world. So she's basically using the Cezannes to upgrade public investment of pride in the White House. This is during the period in which Mrs. Kennedy makes out of the White House a less untasteful residence for a time. Walker always said, and John Rewald accepted it, so this is also Rewald's opinion, that Lœser would have given the pictures to the National Gallery if it had existed. Again, it's not alive in 1928 when he dies. It's not born until 1941. Of course, that is my line as well. Caring for them and safekeeping them, temporarily exhibiting them, and letting them be seen by the widest number of people. We get over 4 million people a year to the National Gallery. Plus, I would say that Lœser's installation demands that they hang alone at specific heights would not have gone well at the White House. Plus, you never know who's going to be in the White House. So what will happen to those Cezannes? So the remaining 6 pictures, not included, is Landscape with the Clock Tower from 1875, quite early, beautiful, like House on the Marne. You can see he's living next door to Guillaume. He's making his pictures next to Guillaume. You see a lot of Guillaume in this. Also another early one, unfinished picture, Houses Floating on a River. Hamlet near Gardanne. Actually, Rewald felt that this was the best of the 8. It's very thinly painted. and maintains a subtle harmony of earth tones, sort of late daylight, absolutely beautiful. Houses on a hill, this wonderful skull painting, and then one of the best of the still lifes, this still life with apples. And I just, his pictures, they don't belong to us. And in fact, they don't belong to any museum. So they have not received the kind of scholarly attention that they would have gotten if they had been participating in scholarly exhibitions like the one that's here. And so they're not so well known. But I think it's so interesting to think of the presence of Cezanne so strong in Florence at the time, when Berenson, at the same time that Berenson is making Florentine art fashionable, is when you have these young collectors. And I think there's a lot more to be done on the impact of Berenson, the vogue for 14th century Italian painting, and sort of the impact on these young collectors. There was a wonderful exhibition called Cezanne in Florence, and Francesca Bardazzi did some really good work on the impact of Cezanne in Paris on contemporary Florentine and Italian painters. But I don't know if you noticed, I was looking at Mr. Nagai's chart, this wonderful chart about where the Cezannes are today around the world. I think the United States had 260. Italy to this day has 3. So you can imagine why they were trying to hang on to these. But think about Florence in the early part of the century. It had the largest number of Cezannes outside of France. There were Fabbri's 30, Charles Lœser's 15. If you were interested in Cezanne, you would go to Florence. All right, I had some more blah, blah, but I think, oh, maybe, you know what? I'm going to close with Bernard Berenson, since we keep circling around him. He had actually been a reluctant fan himself of Cezanne, although later he claimed credit for sending Fabbri and Lœser to Volard's. I don't think that's the case. Lœser had collected Cezanne despite, or perhaps because of, Bernard Berenson's reservations. They had a very spicy relationship. It was very competitive. And in 1941, John Walker had tried to enlist Berenson's help in securing the Lœser pictures, but Berenson didn't think they would go well, actually, at the National Gallery, because recent art would open the National Gallery to pressures from people pushing that were still alive, pushing their own ideas of recent art, and he just didn't think that recent art hangs well with already ancient art, as he put it. He did have to write on Cezanne. The Lœser pictures were, the first time they were ever exhibited together publicly was in 1945 in Florence. And Bernard Berenson writes the essay, the introductory essay for that exhibition catalog, and he talks about Cezanne's tactile values. And then he describes this picture in particular. You could touch, feel, and taste the fruits better than in all the works of the other painters of the recent generation. Less exquisite, less delicate than Chardin, though with more flavor and more sensuousness. And then he closed, if they express anything, it is character, essence, rather than momentary feeling or purpose. They manifest potentiality rather than activity. It is enough that they exist themselves. Thank you.